This episode is brought to you by the Cornell Executive MBA MS in Healthcare Leadership, in partnership with the Weill Cornell Graduate School of Medical Sciences. The future of healthcare needs motivated and business-minded leaders who are equipped to facilitate change from within their organization and throughout the industry at large. Offered on the weekend in New York City, the Cornell Executive MBA MS in Healthcare Leadership is the only dual degree of its kind, combining business breadth and healthcare depth with world-class faculty instruction and an unmatched alumni network. Take the next step towards driving innovation in the healthcare industry by connecting with their admissions team. Search Cornell EMBA-MS to start your journey. Thank you so much for being such a big supporter of the Ellevate podcast. We want to learn more about you and what keeps you up at night. What are the topics and speakers most relevant to you in your career? Please go to ellevatepod.com to fill out our survey, and we'll make sure to incorporate your suggestions as we're planning for 2022.
Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business.
Hello, and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, and I'm excited about today's episode. As many of you know, I am really passionate about the evolution of business, about how businesses become a force for good. And that doesn't mean we all turn into nonprofits, although nonprofits are fantastic. It's around looking at businesses and their impact on their employees, on their customers, their local communities, on their footprint when it comes to supply chains and the environment. It's about businesses standing for something beyond making money. They stand for something bigger and see their place in this ecosystem of our lives. And in the past few years, I've been beyond inspired by not just the guests on our podcast, but all the women in the Ellevate community. Women at various career stages, but who see their role in changing business, who are ready to take on that challenge, who are leading every day in new and unique ways, who care so much about their impact in this world. So today's guest is a wonderful addition to this conversation. Simon just recently came out with a book, and it's all about this. It's all about how we as leaders, we as individuals, we as citizens, think more intentionally about how we lead. It's about how we lead with we, the business revolution that will save our future. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I have. I hope it gets you thinking and inspired, and let us know. We want to hear from you what your thoughts are on leading with we, how we'll save our future. Love to hear from you at podcast@ellevatenetwork.com or tag us on social media, #EllevatePod. See you back here next week. Hi, Simon. Thanks for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Kristy.
So, Simon, I wanted to get started with a little bit about you. Would you mind sharing with our listeners a bit about your story and what led you to this conversation today?
I'm Simon Mainwaring. I'm the CEO and founder of WeFirst. We're a strategic consultancy here in Los Angeles that for the last 10 years has focused exclusively on building purpose-driven brands, really scaling their growth and their impact. And that came about because, having witnessed the global economic meltdown in 2008, I wrote a book called WeFirst about how brands and consumers use social media to build a better world, and have spent the last 10 years really working inside startups and mid-sized companies and large complex global enterprises, because I deeply believe business is really, at the forefront of the change we need to address these challenges we face. And by doing so, we can really grow our businesses. I would also say that I'm a dad. I've got two wonderful daughters with my wife, 22-year-old and a 19-year-old who tell me how out of touch I am every day and school me and what life is all about. So, like all of us, just a family guy and hopefully trying to make a difference through business right now.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. And I wanted to dive in a little bit to why we're here today. You and I met through a peer group around leaders who are really passionate about developing and growing and building businesses with a positive impact on the world. It's been an honor to be in that group with you and to be inspired by you and learn from you. And I know you just came out with a book, Lead With Me, The Business Revolution That Will Save Our Future. So tell me a little bit about the journey to writing this book and what was that initial catalyst for inspiring you to take this leap?
Thank you. Yeah, it's actually lead with we, and it's this distinction between me and we that is so important. And the catalyst for writing the book really was, as I mentioned, after 2008, I saw the global economic meltdown, and I wrote a book because I felt that these social technologies, Facebook, Twitter, and so on, could help us do more good because you could have a dialogue for the first time between brands and consumers and citizens and institutions. But as it turned out over the last 10 years, as most of us have seen, these platforms have largely ended up being sort of advertising platforms, and they've done a lot of good, and a lot of sort of NGOs and foundations and nonprofits and brands have made some impact. But by and large, there's been a lot of issues around privacy and hate speech and other things. Meanwhile, the issues we're trying to solve for, the climate crisis and so on, biodiversity and plastic in our lives, they've all gotten worse. And we're now at a point where we've really got to do something about it, whether, you see it in the headlines or, the COP26 discussions that went on recently. And so the catalyst for this book was really in the last 3 or 4 years, I've really wrestled with the idea of business is not going far enough, fast enough. And I say that for our own sake, for your sake, Kristy, for my life, but also for our kids' lives, because if you look at any of the reports out there, it's going to get very serious very quickly. Yet we're so well equipped and so well poised to do something about it. And so at WeFirst, we've been lucky enough to work with all these companies like Tom's and Timberland and startups and big global enterprises that are really retooling themselves and making a difference at scale. And I thought it would be really important to write a book that would lay out or take all that 10 years of work and lay it out in a step-by-step plan that a company of any size could follow. And it's called Lead with We because I think the fundamental shift that needs to occur really turns on the idea of collaborative leadership. We're not getting far enough, fast enough because, there's lots of great companies doing purposeful work and so on, but the vast majority of business is still kind of looking after their bottom line exclusively, often at the cost of their people or the environment. And we need to get that connective tissue between all our different purposeful efforts. Why? Because the timelines we're working against are contracting towards us. They're not just sitting out there in the future waiting for us to arrive. Climate and loss of biodiversity and ocean acidification, all these issues are compounding and hurtling back towards us in the present. And so the book lays out a step-by-step plan for how you can not only be purposeful and values-driven, but do it with more partners to have greater impact. And that's why the book is called Lead, consciously choosing to lead with as many stakeholders as possible, which is really benefiting the greatest number of people, and the planet.
When you say we're not going far enough, fast enough, and I agree that we're not, why do you think that is? Are leaders just not, are they too focused on the, revenues or other business KPIs, even though we both know that building a better business can lead to better business success as well? Is it just not top of mind enough? I mean, why do you think we're not going further enough, fast enough?
It's a great question because, you can't avoid the trouble we're in the headlines every day, right? And the news that came out of, after COP26 was with the commitments, the greenhouse gas reduction commitments of countries and companies around the world, we're on track for a 2.4 degrees rise in temperature Celsius around the world. And it's going to be catastrophic for all our lives. That's their language, not mine. And with that in mind, why aren't we doing it? I think since the 70s, even since Buckminster Fuller in the 50s, we've been kicking the can down the road saying, yeah, we're slightly aware or increasingly aware of the problem, but we're hoping someone else would fix it, or that traditional custodians of social change like government have fixed it, or maybe a billionaire will fix it, or maybe some company. Unfortunately, we kicked the can down the road that we're out of time, but we're also not doing it because, we've gone from being apathetic about it on one hand to then in many cases looking at the scale of the issues and going, oh, that's too big for me to fix on my own. And so we've gone straight to being sort of, hopeless. So we've gone from apathy to hopelessness with no action in between. And I think it comes down to the sliding scale of reactions. One is, I'm going to make money and it's not my problem. Another is, it's somebody else's problem. Another is, well, I can't prioritize the time or capital expense of actually retooling what I'm doing. And all of this is despite, as you say, all the business case data and use cases examples out there that show it actually builds the bottom line of a business. So I think what is going to change that, sadly, is the immediacy of these challenges in our daily lives. I think we are all very aware of them intellectually up to COVID-19. And then it accelerated during COVID-19 because we became so aware of how fragile life is and the disparities of wealth and economic situation that the pandemic exposed. But I think literally within the next 3 to 5 years, based on all the research I did for Lead with We in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to start feeling it so acutely, whether it's extreme weather, climate refugees, supply chain disruption, that we're all going to be on point. Every single day we're going to be given a reason to say, wait a second, something's wrong. We need to show up differently.
From the consumer mindset, and I have these conversations with my friends and colleagues that, we want to spend our money with businesses that are doing good, that are aligned with our values, that are supporting these social issues and not ignoring them or maybe creating more harm. And yet I think the nature of consumerism makes it such that we still opt in for what's easy or most accessible or the bigger brand name, and aren't always intentional about, not only where we spend our money, but how we engage with these brands. What are your thoughts on that? Am I correct in that thinking? And how are you seeing that mindset really shift towards more intentional or, activist spending?
It's very true. I mean, people are increasingly voting with their dollars, especially younger audiences, millennials and Gen Z. But, I think people don't do it for several reasons. They do default to habits and so on, or they're not equipped with the information to know the real cost of that product in terms of its carbon footprint or its damage to the environment or how it treats animals in the process and so on and so on. So we haven't really been equipped with information. But to your point, if you look at Edelman's Trust Barometer report, and so much research out there shows that the vast majority of global consumers, and especially the younger demos, now will actually penalize a company that is not taking a stand or a social or political issue. They will consciously choose a product and even pay a premium for that product if it, they can demonstrate clearly that it has a positive impact. And in fact, they will walk away from brands and companies that actually either stay silent or try and play both sides of the fence on a key issue that's affecting their lives. But, I think the real challenge is this. There is a lot of legacy forces that don't want things to change, like old industries, maybe oil and gas, that really sort of are trying to incentivize things to stay where they are. Then there are certain companies out there that are purpose washing, where they're just managing the optics of it, but not really doing it for real. And then there are companies that are doing it, small and large, but it takes a little bit of time to get that plane off the ground, to get those market forces so clearly rewarding everyone for doing something differently that it takes on a life of its own. It's self-evident. And we're just at that point of tension right now. The data's there, the examples there, just a few examples. Walmart, the largest retailer in the world, has just announced Project Gigaton, where it's working with its suppliers to take a gigaton of carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, out of the air. Or if you look at Nestle, the biggest food company in the world with over 2,000 brands that we all have in our kitchen cabinet, they have just announced Project Generation Regeneration, which is moving all of their supply chains around the world to regenerative practices. I mean, these are not only big leadership examples, they're huge signals to the marketplace. And they're doing it because not only retail investors like you and I who might buy stocks in a company, but also institutional investors, pension funds, are now penalizing brands that aren't showing up more responsibly. And invariably, it comes down to the money. If the money is supporting new behaviors, then it will encourage market forces that will, reward those companies that are making good for you, good for the planet products. That will meet a consumer need for those products. And so those companies will grow. And so the big companies will change what they're doing to compete with those younger companies, and so on and so on. So I don't think it's not working. I think we're just at that critical inflection point where the issues we're solving for are becoming more real and present in our lives. More and more companies are responding, and we're just going over that inflection point.
Are there any companies that are further along on this journey that are really leading the way?
There are so many great companies. I mean, I'll give you some obvious examples, but also some less obvious ones. I mean, you've got Unilever, which is the largest CPG company, consumer packaged good company in the world. And they've got their Ben & Jerry's and seventh generation, that are flagship sort of purposeful do-good brands. But they're also divesting themselves of other brands that they have that aren't purposeful. Why? Because the vast majority of growth, over 65% of their growth, actually comes from those purposeful brands because people want to buy from, work for, invest in companies doing good. I mean, on another level, you might have a company B2B, which we don't normally hear about, like Interface, which is, the largest carpet tile manufacturer in the world, creating a tool like the EC3 carbon calculator, which is they're opening that up to everyone in the construction industry so that they can all look at the carbon footprint of what they're doing and be more responsible. Or if you look at IKEA in Europe, IKEA now, not only in Europe, but also the US, allows you to take back the furniture you no longer want, and they buy it back because they want to create this circular economy with less waste. But in Europe, they're actually selling renewable energy to their customers to make their households climate positive. So when did an affordable furniture maker suddenly start selling renewable energy? And I want to give you one last example closer to home here in LA. That's a smaller company. It's an apparel company called Prana. And they decided they wanted to get plastic out of their supply chain because, you order something from Amazon or you get something from Prada, and there's a lot of plastic involved when you buy a jersey or whatever it might be. They actually developed a new way of folding their products so that in 1 year's time, they started this at the end of 2019. In 1 year's time, they took 10 million plastic bags out of their supply chain. They then opened that up to other companies, the learnings, the insights, the practices, and they now have 106 companies in what is called the responsible packaging movement. And just think for a second, if one relatively, small or mid-sized company takes 10 million plastic bags out of its supply chain, times that by 106 companies, simply by sharing, by leading with we, by opening up your IP to others to level up the entire industry. So just a few examples there.
I love those examples and, really appreciate just even the perspective there of, what is that net impact? Because, I think especially as consumers, we might hear some of these programs that companies are launching or commitments they're making, but to really be able to contextualize, all the plastic bags. I mean, you can see it and say, wow, yes, I don't want, that. And,
right?
And it helps to really connect me and I think our listeners with, a deeper understanding of why this is so important.
Well, just think of, all of us get too many Amazon packages every day or week or month. And you sit there, I'm sure all of us are sat there and gone, darn, look at all this packaging or look at the size of this box, just for whatever this small item was, a packet of batteries or whatever it might be. And it's interesting. It's not just consumers that are demanding it. Think about employees. In the last year and a half, we've seen employees at Amazon, Google, and Facebook push back over privacy, pay scales, gender bias. Even a couple of weeks ago, we saw 1,400 employees at McKinsey, one of the largest consulting firms in the world, write an open letter to their leadership complaining about some of their clients they have because those clients are complicit in the climate crisis. I mean, so you're on the hook from your employees, you're on the hook from your customers, you're on the hook from investors. There's nowhere to hide now.
Well, we talk a lot at Ellevate about, how you really create change in business. And it has to be, top down, bottom up. It can't, obviously you need leaders to buy into it, but there needs to be ways for this thinking and this change to happen throughout the entire organization. You mentioned this earlier. You can't have a leader who's just saying, yes, this matters. It's this matters. And then this is how we incorporate it into the tech team. This is how we incorporate it into new hires. This is how we incorporate it across the board. And so, well, what are your insights on, how does an organization really try to internalize this shift? And you did mention it takes time, and it does, but any best practices that come to mind?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because that's where the rubber hits the road. And my answer is based on 10 years of doing this with startups and venture PE-backed companies, individual brands, but also enterprises like Sony Pictures and VSP and Avery Dennison and VF Corporation. So this is practitioners' insights, shall we say. A few things. Firstly, you've got to recognize that you've got to define your purpose, which is why you exist as a company. And it needs to be foundational to the entire business. It's not just a comms exercise or a CSR exercise, and at worst, guilty of purpose washing where you just put a nice campaign out there, but nothing's changed. It needs to inform your entire value chain, all the way upstream through your suppliers and who you work with and what products you make and how you make them, through to your company culture and how you treat your people, from onboarding even through to alumni programs, right through the life cycle of your employees, through to the products you take to market and how you market them, through to your community impact work and the partners that you work with. To your question about how you do it right, here's an insight that we found has been incredibly transformative in the effectiveness of the work that we've done. Most companies, unfortunately, but with the best of intentions, have a purposeful mindset. But what they do is they map their approach to what they do with their org structure or their supply chain, which is top-down management, instead of recognizing that you need to turn it upside down and make it a bottom-up approach where the company, its leadership, is a platform on which the employees, the partners, the customers stand and go out in the world and execute against that purpose, upstream, downstream, in everything they do. And the way to do this effectively is to co-create through employee surveys and work sessions and so on what your company purpose is. And I can speak to that in a second if you like. But then you've got to share that from the top-down approach with everyone in the company. It could be an all-hands meeting. It could be an annual conference that you do. It could be a CEO speech. But you've got to share it with everybody and let them know that this was a co-created process. That's top-down. But then you've got to do bottom-up, which is in very short order over the next several months and over the following years, you've got to identify and surface up the stories of people across all departments, in all functional roles, no matter how big or small you are, and surface up those stories where they're executing against the purpose. It might be a new innovation. It might be a volunteering day. It might be you've tweaked your supply chain to get waste out of it. But share those stories so that they know that leadership, management are prioritizing your purpose as highly as they are your profit. So top down, bottom up. And then the third thing is over time, keep that balloon in the air so it doesn't sink to the ground. And for that, you need to do rituals like quarterly meetings or all hands meetings or an annual tradition of volunteering that is a reset back to that alignment with your purpose to remind everyone in a visceral, experiential way that this is what the company is about. And again, I don't want to put up a false tension between purpose and profit. For all the reasons we've been talking about, Kristy, purpose is driving profit. People want to buy from, invest in, work for companies doing good. And all the data's there. So the more you lean into doing this and integrating it effectively, top down, bottom up over time, the more you'll have a resilient culture, a productive culture. People will bring their whole selves to work. That will show up with your customers and your R&D, in your marketing, and it will build your bottom line.
Well, and then talk to me about purpose. You've been sharing. I mean, I love these examples, and it starts with that purpose and that, shared purpose that, everyone, all stakeholders are involved in crafting that. And so what is the framework for that?
Well, what I've done in the book Lead with We is I've laid out the methodology that we've used on Tom's and Timberland and Virgin and so many other companies that as well as these smaller companies, and I'll give you an insight into that, and then I want to draw a distinction between what the book builds on, or how it builds on purpose. Your purpose is why you exist as a company. And often it's hard to identify if you're in the company or in a leadership capacity because it's hard to read the label from inside the jar. You've got all of these ideas bouncing around in your head. You've got all the demands on a daily basis, and you're like, we're lots of different things. What you've got to do is externalize yourself, get outside of yourself. And what I mean by that is you've got to ask questions that will reveal the themes that speak to what your true, authentic purpose is. And the three key questions are, what is your enemy? So what do you exist to solve for? What are you against? At We First, my company, we're against the me first practice of business. At Uber, it's, against this sort of bad taxi experience. At Airbnb, it's about the homogenous hotel experience. It really doesn't let you belong somewhere. So what is your enemy? Secondly, what are you the only of? There's only one person like you in one team like yours, in one company like yours, in one industry at this moment in time. You are unique. So what is that? And then thirdly, when you're at your best, what are you doing? When you are crushing it, when you're doing high fives in the mirror, if you're a solopreneur, you're high-fiving your own other hand, who knows, and you're just crushing it that day. What are you doing? If you start to answer questions like these and more, which are all laid out in the book, you start to look at it and go, oh, wait a second. There's a theme here. I see the same ideas coming up in different answers. You then interrogate that language and define a purpose specifically. And I'll give you an example of a result. So in 2015, when Bain Capital invested or bought half of Tom's, we worked with Tom's to define their purpose. And the solution on the strength of these questions was, their purpose is to create a world where you live for one, another. To create a world where you live for one another. Why is that important? You buy one shoe and another's given for one another. But also leadership and employees are there for one another. Employees in the US and around the world are there for one another. The private sector and public sector are there for one another. Their way of being they own in the world is living for one another. So it's a very big idea that allowed you to speak to all stakeholders, all product verticals, at any moment in time or any part of the supply chain. And it really was an emotional higher order rally cry for the company. And Blake Mycoskie, who was the CEO and founder at the time, he actually got it tattooed on his left bicep for one another. So who'd have thought it? Who'd have thunk it? So anyway, but there's one other point, Kristy, I'd make on this, which is the point of Lead with We is this idea of collectivized purpose. And what I mean by that is we're not getting far enough, fast enough, because we've got all these isolated efforts going on. And rather, we need a new purpose for business at large, which is to restore and regenerate the living and social systems on which all of our futures depend. Because right now, the whole is breaking down. The environment's breaking down. Our social systems are breaking down. So the parts, our businesses, can't thrive. Brands can't survive in societies that fail. So we need a whole new purpose for business as a movement in its own right. And then each company needs to have its own purpose, specific and authentic to them. And that way, business becomes a movement of movements with that connective tissue that will allow us to accelerate and scale our response. Why? Because at the utmost, we've got like 10 to 12 years before the cascading effect of these issues like climate and biodiversity will severely compromise our daily lives. It's already here. The UN came out last week and said, we are on track for that 2.4% Celsius rise globally in temperature. That's already baked into what we're doing right now. We don't want that future. And so my big preoccupation is, how can you, if you're a solopreneur, a small startup or a big company, drive growth for your business by leveraging these market forces that reward companies showing up and doing good, so that you not only thrive in the next 5-10 years, but you actually help solve for these issues?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We need a whole new business model and structure. And, I'm hopeful because of leaders like you who are sharing all of these great insights with our community and your clients and through your book. Just as you mentioned, I'm hopeful because we are seeing more employees, stand up for creating change. We're seeing consumers doing that. We're seeing businesses lead the way. We're seeing some legislation on this. And so that's this convening of, consumers, employees, government, and business leaders who are at this critical juncture of saying, yes, things have to change. And we may not have all the answers, but we're learning and we're sharing and we're taking steps every day. And that is inspiring.
It is inspiring, and I'm very, very optimistic. I'm not negative about the future at all, and I'll tell you why. To your very point, everybody's showing up at different levels because their own self-interest is at stake. It doesn't matter where you are, how wealthy you are, where you live in the world, what company, B2B, B2C you have, you're feeling it. Whether it's your supply chain, your ability to attract talent, new expectations from customers, reputation, and trying to compete with other people who are talking about the good they're doing. And quite honestly, I'll tell you why I'm optimistic. And I think too much of this gets overlooked. I'm going to give you a bunch of reasons. Firstly, old mindsets are giving way to new mindsets. Whether it's Larry Fink at BlackRock, the biggest money management firm in the world, talking about how your social purpose is as if not more important than your business purpose. The CEOs of Business Roundtable and B Corps. Also we're seeing this proliferation, these legions of young, social entrepreneurs that are starting a business to solve a problem. And they are so inspiring and so determined. We're also seeing an amazing number of climate solutions all coming together at once with deep resources and really powerful, alliances. We've got exponential technologies like blockchain, AI, robotics, and so on that can provide solutions at scale. We've also got, these new market forces that I mentioned where capital from investors, retail and institutional, is now being directed towards companies that make good for you, good for the planet products. And that's creating new market forces. I mean, just look at clean beauty, look at clean food, look at sustainable apparel, look at the auto industry where every auto brand has now made a commitment to transitioning to alternative energy vehicles. And also, finally, I'd say our survival instinct is kicking in. We've kicked the can down the road for so long, but we realize we're out of time. And COVID has been a huge wake-up call to that end. And so we're seeing incredible innovation that works with nature rather than against it. And we're also starting to trust ourselves as business leaders that we don't need to buy into this profit for profit's sake, my success on the back of somebody else's failure mentality anymore. We are, let's lean into the innate goodness of us as human beings. Let's really reconnect with the natural world, which is just part of our body chemistry, what it means to be human. And any one of these forces that I mentioned are potentially transformative, but we've never tried them all together at once. And so I think this is the absolute rebirth of business. I don't think it's the end of something. I think it's a miraculous rebirth, and we're going to have an astonishing decade in the next decade. But it's going to be for those companies that get ahead of these market forces, commit to being purposeful, and let those market forces carry them forward.
Oh, thank you for all of this, Simon, and for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. Can you share with our listeners how they can get their copy of Lead with We?
Thank you for asking. And it's up on Amazon now, or you can go to leadwithwe.com. And I'd like to ask you to do three things, if you might. The book is 10 years of our practice with these companies, laid out in a step-by-step blueprint, so you don't have to think about it. It's all there, all the use cases, research examples, and the plan to follow. So grab a copy for yourself. But we won't get there if we don't do this together. So please buy another copy and give it to an entrepreneur or someone in a position of some sort of influence inside a company that you think could benefit from it, because you'll double your impact simply by doing that. And then thirdly, if you feel so motivated, I'd love you to talk about or share Lead with We on social media, because we got in this mess together and we've got to get out of it together. And the only way we're going to do that is if we realize we've all got to step up and make a difference. So please do grab Lead with We for yourself, for somebody else. And I'd so appreciate it if you share it. The timelines we're working against are contracting towards us, but people are showing up like never before. But it is go time.
It is definitely go time. Well, Simon, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Kristy, and really appreciate being a part of your community today.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes. Give us 5 stars and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Ellevate NTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. ellevate.com. And special thanks to our producer, Katherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.